My boyfriend picked his sister instead of me just because she was poor, until I learned she'd been lying about everything. You ever fall for someone so hard, you walk blindly into their life thinking it's a beautiful, messy adventure, only to realize their home isn't just a house, it's a battleground? What if the person you loved was tangled in a web of family trauma so thick, you became the villain just for trying to pull them free? My story starts on a night the sky was literally falling. Wind tried to rip the car door from my hand. Rain threatened to drown the entire town. But somehow, some community fundraiser was still happening in a drafty rental hall. There I was, Karen, queen of pretending everything was fine, freezing in a thrift store dress, holding a plastic cup of flat soda. My life was already a juggling act. Office assistant, tiny apartment, always feeling like I was waiting for my real life to begin. And then he walked in, or rather, he was already there, stacking chairs, laughing, a volunteer badge crooked on his chest. He looked at me, standing alone by the snack table, and asked if I needed help with a stubborn drink bottle. I joked, and he laughed like I was actually funny, not just nervous. We talked for hours, the storm howling outside, organizers debating if they should call it quits. It felt easy, like I'd known him forever. He worked brutal warehouse shifts, saving for his house, his biggest accomplishment, his proof he'd pulled himself out of some dark place. There was this light in his eyes when he spoke about it, like it was more than just drywall and paint. That night, after we'd swapped numbers and promised to see each other again, he dropped a bombshell. He didn't live alone. His sister stayed with him. She's been through a lot, he said. It's complicated. He said complicated, the way people do when they desperately hope you won't ask questions. I didn't push. I had my own complicated relatives. I thought I understood. I thought I could handle it. I had no idea that house he loved so much was actually a stage where his entire family had been performing the same toxic play for years, and I was about to walk in as the new character no one wanted to rewrite the script for. A few days later, the storm passed, and so did my hesitation. We started dating. Our messages turned into calls, then into late-night drives after his shifts. He was tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. He told me about sleeping in his car to save for the down payment while his friends partied. I told him about my boring job and my even more boring apartment, how I felt like I was constantly on standby for my actual life. The first time he invited me to the house, he handed me a spare key, almost shyly. He said it like that key meant something huge, more than just metal. Standing on the porch, looking at that modest 3-bedroom house, I felt it too. It wasn't a mansion, but to him it was everything. And listening to him talk about fixing the fence and the new roof, I started to feel protective of it too, even though my name wasn't on the paperwork. Then the door opened. His sister. She scanned me up and down, a slow, deliberate gaze that made me hyper-aware of my cheap shoes and frizzy hair. She had this posture that screamed, "This is my territory." No smile, no introduction. Just a flat, chilling voice to her brother. "Dinner's in the oven. Try not to make a mess." He told her my name, said I was the person he'd been talking about. She nodded, still without a smile, and stepped aside. I've never felt so much hostility in a hallway. It was like walking through invisible spiderwebs. I tried to brush it off. People have bad days, right? Maybe she was tired, anxious, maybe her story was heavier than I realized. In the living room, I tried to see the house through his eyes. Clean, neutral colors. But on every surface, framed photos. Almost all of them, just him and her. Different ages, different haircuts. No parents, no cousins, no old girlfriends. Just them locked in time. She sat in the armchair opposite us, and the interrogation began. Where do you work? How much do you make? Do you live alone? How long in the city? Debt. It was a job interview, and the job was access to her brother's life. He shifted uncomfortably, tried to steer the conversation, but she kept circling back to money, stability, my long-term plans. When I mentioned wanting to buy my own place, she smirked. Buying property isn't for everyone. Like I'd just declared I wanted to colonize Mars. I laughed it off. I didn't want to fight. I didn't know yet that the living room, the questions, the photos, all of it, were part of a structure she'd built to keep him orbiting her forever. Later, driving me home, he apologized. Her husband left her. The divorce was brutal. She tried to end her life. She'd moved in 5 years ago and never left. He'd promised their parents he'd keep her safe. He said she was intense but fragile. He needed me to be patient. I stared out the window, watching streetlights blur, and knot tightening in my stomach. On one hand, I understood. Trauma isn't neat. On the other hand, 5 years. 5 years of living in his house, paying nothing, controlling everything. 5 years of every picture being just the two of them. 5 years of being the fragile one everyone tiptoed around. I told him I'd try. I told myself I could be the bigger person. I didn't realize that in a house where everyone else refuses to grow up, being the bigger person just means you become the tallest target. The next few months were a weird mix of sweet and tense. When it was just us, it was easy. We cooked, watched dumb shows, talked for hours. But when she was home, the whole atmosphere shifted. She claimed the living room every night, sprawled on the couch, TV blaring. If we tried to join, she'd sigh dramatically, pause her show, or start talking over us. I tried to connect with her, offered to cook, asked about her job. Sometimes she'd engage, but it always devolved into a backhanded comment. I was lucky to still believe in relationships. Was I ready to support her brother when he burned out? People show their best version at the beginning, she'd say, then start rotting from the inside. I even found myself venting to the neighbor, a sweet older woman whose wind chimes never stopped tinkling. She'd watched the sister strut around for years while my boyfriend ran himself ragged. It didn't make me feel better, knowing I'd walked into a pre-existing mess. But I liked him. I liked how he saw me, how he remembered tiny details. So I stayed. I tried. The first night, I truly stayed over. Toothbrush in the bathroom, pajamas on his dresser. She watched me like a hawk. Every time I crossed the hall, she looked up. Every time I went to the kitchen, she appeared 5 seconds later, needing water or to wipe a clean counter. She waited until he was in the shower, then cornered me, leaning against the wall like I was trespassing in her kingdom. She asked how my schedule would fit their routine. She explained slowly like I was simple, her TV shows, her kitchen preferences, her specific bathroom hours due to her sensitive stomach. Then, chillingly, she asked what I planned to contribute. Financially, cleaning-wise, emotionally. I stammered, "We haven't talked about moving in. I'm just staying the night." She gave that smirk. Women don't leave toothbrushes in bathrooms without a plan. I wanted to shout that he had asked me, that he was pushing for more. But the shower turned off, and I didn't want him walking into a fight. Later, in his room, the door closed. He was so happy I was there. I told myself I'd talk to him later. That later kept getting pushed back because something was always burning in that house, even when there was no smoke. Then came the first big sabotage. He actually planned a romantic evening. Candles, music, dinner for two. His parents were taking her out. She came down, dressed up, looking like the main event. She hugged him, even gave me a nod. Then, just as she reached the door, she stopped. "I feel sick," she said, clutching her stomach. "I don't think I can go out." Huge, childlike eyes. His parents, confused, tried to persuade her, but she insisted she might pass out. They left without her. The candles suddenly felt ridiculous. She flopped onto the couch, grabbed a blanket, and turned on some loud show. He looked at me, apologetic. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'll talk to her tomorrow." My chest felt like it was in a vice, but I said it was fine. We ate in the bedroom, the TV roaring from the living room. I told myself it was just one bad night. Fragile people panic. I didn't want to be that girlfriend who demanded he ignore his sister's distress. So I swallowed my disappointment and my resentment along with overcooked pasta. The second sabotage hit harder. It cost me something that was mine. I had a huge work presentation coming up, one that could launch my career. I'd talked about it for weeks. He knew how nervous I was, promised to drive me so I could review notes. I woke up early, dressed carefully, checked my slides for the millionth time. He was supposed to be ready 15 minutes before we needed to leave. 10 minutes past that, his phone rang. His sister. Her contact photo flashed like an alarm. He answered, his face changing, his voice dropping to an urgent, soothing tone. "It's okay. Breathe. I'm coming. Just hold on." He hung up. "She's at the ER," he said. "Called from the parking lot. Having a breakdown. Needs me there right away." I reminded him, gently at first, then not so gently, about my presentation. I couldn't be late. He looked torn for maybe 3 seconds. Then he grabbed his keys. The hospital was in the opposite direction from my job. He did the math. "I'm sorry," he said. I have to go. You'll figure something out. Ride, share, bus, anything. I watched him leave, watched his car turn the corner, and stood in the kitchen, feeling like an idiot in a blazer. I waited forever for a ride share. By the time I got to work, the presentation had started without me. Someone else stepped in. My boss gave me that look. That, "you're not as reliable as I thought" look. Later, he came home with his sister. She looked totally fine. No swollen eyes, no hospital bracelet, no evidence of seeing a single doctor. She just needed to be evaluated, she said in an airy voice. But they released her. The waiting room was too crowded. When I asked which doctor she'd seen, she couldn't name one. My stomach dropped. I tried to explain what it had cost me. That being there for her didn't mean dropping everything every time she snapped her fingers. He instantly went defensive. She would never lie about something like that. Not after what she's been through. He said I was being cruel. That word stung more than anything. We had our first screaming fight that night. I didn't handle it well. "Maybe you're not ready for a partner," I yelled. "Maybe you're still married to your sister's trauma." He shouted back that I was selfish, only cared about my career, that family comes first. "I have a family too," I shrieked. "My future matters. I'm not going to be the third wheel in my own relationship." He slept on the couch, which was ridiculous because his sister was already there. She disappeared to her room when we started yelling, but I knew she heard every word. The next day, his parents called, voices tight. They'd heard I accused their daughter of faking a mental health crisis. His sister had already told them her version. Suddenly, I was the insensitive girlfriend who didn't understand mental illness, who cared more about a presentation than a possible relapse. My reality was slipping. I knew what I'd seen, how she'd sounded, how composed she'd been later. But I couldn't prove it without sounding like a monster. I felt like I was losing not just the house, but my grip on my own instincts. More little things started happening. My favorite mug moved, my phone charger vanished, my sorted laundry mixed back into the dirty pile. I started keeping notes. It sounds paranoid, and maybe it was, but I needed proof I wasn't losing my mind. Dates, times, what had moved, what was said. I documented the night she interrupted a conversation about our engagement. We were talking quietly about getting married, saving for a future. We didn't see her shadow, didn't hear the floorboards creak. She was just suddenly there in the doorway, eyes wide, like she'd walked in on something obscene. Then, pure rage, she screamed that he couldn't do this to her, that he was abandoning her just like her ex, that she wasn't ready to live alone. She accused me of using him for money, of having planned this from the moment I saw the house. She yelled that everything nice in that place came from his sweat, and she wouldn't let some stranger waltz in and take it. I snapped. "I know," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the fire in my chest, "that you've lived here for 5 years without paying a single bill. If anyone's taking advantage, it's not me." She went silent for half a beat, as if my words had physically slapped her. Then she started crying. Loud, ugly crying, the kind that makes anyone witnessing it feel like the villain. She ran to her room. He ran after her. I sat on the bed, staring at the wall, wondering how I'd become the bad guy in a story where I was just trying to build a life with someone. He came back later, looking exhausted. She was calm now, he said, just needed time to adjust. He asked me not to bring up the bills again. It was a sensitive topic. Sensitive. Living rent-free for half a decade while your brother works himself into the ground is sensitive. I tried to pull back emotionally after that, but feelings aren't faucets you can just shut off. A few months later, he proposed quietly over dinner. No big spectacle, just him, hands shaking a little, holding out a ring. He asked if I still wanted to do this with him, despite everything. I said yes. Of course I did. For all his blind spots, for all his cowardice when it came to his sister, he loved me. I believed that. I thought maybe with the engagement official, he'd finally draw some lines. I underestimated how deep his guilt went, how much power she had over it. We came home that night, the ring new and shiny on my finger. She was waiting. She opened the door before we even reached it, saw the ring. For a second, her face went blank. Then, the most unsettling smile I'd ever seen. She congratulated us, hugged him, even me, briefly, her hands cold on my back. She said she'd stay out of our way and let us plan. She went to her room, closing the door gently. A chill ran through me that the heater couldn't touch. For a while she played nice, asked about venues, dates, color schemes, offered to help with decorations. I almost believed her. Then the little sabotages returned, dressed in new clothes. Loud repairs scheduled exactly during our virtual venue tours. Borrowing the car without asking on wedding errand days, then claiming she'd forgotten. I kept writing everything down. I started taking photos. Receipts left on the counter. Bank mail left open in the trash, showing raised limits due to high balances. A neighbor's comment about seeing her drive a brand new sedan downtown. The puzzle pieces clicked. She wasn't broke. She wasn't helpless. She had a well-paying, full-time job. She'd had her own money for a while. I waited until he was calm, until she was out of the house, until we had time. I spread out the photos, the notes, the printouts. I laid it all out. I watched the color drain from his face. His hands shook. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Debts, leased car, a mistake. But the more he looked, the more the cracks showed. Patterns he couldn't ignore. Numbers that didn't add up to helplessness. He went quiet in a way I'd never seen. Not shut down, but the brutal quiet of someone realizing their entire reality was a lie. He said he needed to talk to her. I agreed. The confrontation was like watching a play from the back of the theater. I could hear everything through the thin walls. He started with calm questions. She dodged. He pressed. She cried. She screamed. Accused me of turning him against her. Said he was abandoning her, just like her ex. But this time he didn't back down. Whether it was the evidence or just finally reaching his limit, he told her. Things had to change. 60 days to find her own place. He'd help with bills, with the move, but after that she had to go. She reacted like he'd sentenced her to exile. She called their parents, sobbing loud enough for the street to hear, claiming he was heartless, that I had poisoned him. That weekend his parents arrived, ready to calm things down. And for once, the universe cut me a break. They saw the bank mail. They saw the car. They heard the neighbor's comment. They listened to him lay out everything. There was a moment in the living room, all four of them and me half in, half out, feeling like an intruder in a family war. His mother looked at his sister, asked point blank how she paid for that car if she had no money. His sister stumbled over her words. His father frowned. The narrative she'd built over 5 years crumbled right there on the beige carpet. Then his best friend showed up, like some chaotic, neutral messenger. He sat, listened, and said what no one else would. I've seen this before. She's ruined 2 relationships with these tricks. She knows if she whispers about being unstable, everyone falls in line. It was brutal. It was also the truth. The deadline stood, 60 days. She hated me openly after that. No more polite masks, no more fragile act. Slammed doors, banged cabinets. She made sure I knew she blamed me. I started keeping a packed suitcase under the bed, just in case. 1 week before the deadline, she suddenly became sick. Mysterious stomach pain, late-night ER trips, vague social media posts about being forced out while unwell. She messaged him, "If anything happens to me, it's on your conscience." She called relatives they hadn't spoken to in years, twisted the story. The deadline came and went. She was still there, still in her room, still hogging the bathroom, still leaving passive-aggressive notes. He hesitated. I saw it. Guilt had its hands around his throat again. I broke before he did. I packed a bag one afternoon while he was at work, wrote a short note, left it on his pillow, walked next door, my voice shaking as I asked the neighbor if I could stay. She didn't even blink. Made up the guest bed, handed me tea, told me I didn't have to explain until I was ready. He showed up 2 days later, looking like he hadn't slept. He sat at the neighbor's kitchen table. "I've started the legal process," he said. "Forms a hearing. It'll take time, but it's happening." He couldn't bear the thought of me building a life anywhere else while his sister strangled his future in that house. The weeks that followed were slow, vicious. She did everything she could to make the environment unbearable. Clothes ruined with bleach. Scratches gouged into the bedroom floor. A sentimental dish, his grandmother's, smashed on the counter with a note. Accidents happen. He documented it all. Photos, dates. The lawyer told him to. The sister, who'd played helpless for years, showed her teeth. She locked herself in her room, claimed tenant rights. He couldn't just change the locks. The system meant to protect vulnerable people was now weaponized by someone faking vulnerability for gain. His parents, finally fully awake, backed him. They offered to help her with apartment deposits. She spat their kindness back, posting bitter messages online about being betrayed. The day the moving truck finally pulled up, months after that first deadline, the air in the house was heavy, charged. She supervised the movers in icy silence, taking everything she could, even some things that were technically his. He just wanted her out. When the truck pulled away and the house went quiet, he stood in the living room and cried. Not silent tears of regret, but full-bodied sobs. The kind of sobs that tell you how much of his life had been spent carrying someone who never intended to walk on her own. I stood there, relief tangled with a strange grief for a relationship damaged beyond repair. A few weeks later, we painted the walls. New colors, new furniture, small changes that felt massive. We took down most of the old photos, slowly replaced them with new ones, of us, of friends, of his parents. Dinners and holidays that didn't end in shouting matches. The house started to feel lighter, like it was finally allowed to be a home, not a holding cell. His mother reached out, separately. Over coffee, she apologized for not seeing things sooner, for believing her daughter's performance over the quiet reality I was living. She admitted she'd been afraid that confronting one child meant losing her entirely, and in trying to save her, they'd almost cost their son his future. I told her I understood. Trauma makes people do strange things, but understanding doesn't erase the damage. We both agreed. Some things leave marks. We eventually had our wedding. Smaller, more intimate, more boundaries. We invited his sister, not because we expected her, but because I didn't want to be the reason their relationship stayed permanently broken, however slim the chance of softening. She sent a short message, saying she'd try to make it. She didn't show. Instead, a long, rambling text about how watching him move on was too painful, how she'd always feel like he traded her in. He read it once, put his phone in his pocket, and walked back to the dance floor. We didn't talk about it again that night. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, just the hum of the fridge and a distant car, I think about how close I came to walking away. I think about the versions of me in other timelines, the ones who left, the ones who stayed but never spoke up, who became shadows tiptoeing around someone else's volcano. In this timeline I stayed, but I drew a line. I left when I had to. I made him choose, not between me and his sister, but between living in the past and building an actual future. It's still messy. It still hurts sometimes. Family wounds don't just close. But when I wake up in this house now, I don't feel like a guest in someone else's drama. I feel like it's mine too. Not just because of the ring or my name on paper, but because I fought for it. Because I stopped letting other people's trauma take up every inch of space. Because I finally believed that my sanity, my career, my dreams of a home that smelled like my own cooking were worth protecting. People say houses remember. If that's true, this house remembers slammed doors, whispered threats, silent tears. It remembers guilt echoing louder than any argument. But I like to think it also remembers the first time I sat on the couch after she left, legs tucked up, hair a mess, eating leftovers, laughing with him over some stupid show, and feeling, for the first time, like the walls weren't closing in, but opening up. Maybe one day she'll get real help. Maybe she'll figure out how to live without needing someone else to hold her up. Maybe she'll hate me forever. That part isn't really my story anymore. What I know is this. I walked into a house haunted by a living person. And somehow, with a lot of screaming, a lot of crying, and a judge's signature, we managed to let that ghost go. It's not a perfect ending. There's no big group hug, no magically healed family. It's just us in a small house, paying bills, arguing over wet towels, making up, learning how to be partners without a third party hijacking every decision. It's just real life, which is messy and petty and painful, and on good days pretty good. And honestly, I'll take that over a drama-filled living room with a permanent third person on the couch any day. If you're wondering if everything just stayed magically peaceful after all that, it really didn't. Real life isn't a movie. There's no closing credit scene where everyone suddenly knows the right words to say forever. We still had plenty of nights where something small turned into something loud, then into that awful quiet heavier than yelling. There were mornings I went to work with swollen eyes and too much concealer because an argument had dragged past midnight, and neither of us wanted to back down. Those fights weren't always about his sister directly, but underneath almost every single one, there was this shared bruise from everything that had happened in that house before. We ended up in a tiny counseling office, talking to a tired-looking woman with kind eyes who'd clearly heard every version of codependent family drama 100 times. She didn't do magic. She just asked annoying questions. Why did I stay so long without saying what I really needed? Why did he think it was his job to be the emotional paramedic for everyone in his family? She made us actually listen to each other, instead of just rehearsing what we already believed. One thing she said stuck with me. When you spend years in survival mode, you start to think the constant adrenaline and chaos is normal. A calm life feels wrong, like the quiet before a storm. Of course, the house felt weird after his sister left. We were both waiting for the next explosion. We had to teach our bodies that peace was not the same thing as danger. Small things helped. Making routines that were ours, that had nothing to do with anyone else. Walks after dinner. Phones left on the counter. Cooking together, even when we messed up the recipe and ate cereal instead. Laughing at how bad we were at fixing a crooked shelf. Then calling someone who actually knew what they were doing instead of pretending we had everything under control. His parents came over more often, too, but differently. Less frantic, less about putting out fires, more about just sharing a meal. His mother once confessed, her voice low, that she used to dread visiting because she never knew what version of her daughter she'd get. And now, she could finally look forward to it. I won't pretend I'm some saint in all this. I still catch myself keeping score, mentally tallying who compromised more, who apologized first. I still have moments where I feel this irrational spike of jealousy if he gets a message from an unknown number. That kind of hypervigilance doesn't vanish just because the original threat packed her things and moved. Every once in a while, someone will mention his sister, a relative asking if he's talked to her, if she's doing better. He usually gives a vague answer, changes the subject. I keep my face neutral. I don't join. Her name still feels like a trigger pulled in slow motion. There was one message she sent months after the wedding that I never told anyone about. It popped up late one night. Long, rambling, not really an apology. She said she hoped I was happy. She said she knew I'd always see her as the villain of my little story. She said that one day I might understand how terrifying it is to watch someone move on without you when you've built your entire identity around being their reason for staying. For a second, reading it, I felt this weird ache in my chest. Not sympathy, exactly, but that uncomfortable awareness that even the people who hurt us most are still human in their own way. Then I thought about the ruined clothes, the smashed heirloom, the way she looked at me like I was an intruder in a life she believed she owned. And the ache turned into something else. Not anger, not anymore, just a very firm no. I deleted the message, not out of pettiness, but because I didn't want it living in my phone, waiting to ambush me on a bad day. If she ever truly wants to make things right, it won't be through a half-honest paragraph sent at midnight. It'll have to be in person, with real accountability. And honestly, I'm not holding my breath. So, no, this isn't some inspirational story with a neat moral and soft music. It's just me, sitting at my kitchen table, telling you how a woman who was basically a permanent guest in her brother's house almost became the main character in my entire relationship. It's me admitting I stayed longer than a lot of people think they would have, that I ignored red flags because I loved him, that I lost parts of myself and had to claw them back piece by piece. If there's anything close to a point here, it's this. A house isn't a home just because someone worked themselves half to death to pay for it. It becomes a home when the people inside stop treating guilt like a mortgage and start treating respect like a non-negotiable bill. We're still late on that payment sometimes. We still mess up. But at least now, when the wind howls outside and the weather turns strange, I don't immediately brace for a new internal storm. I just check the forecast, close the windows, and remind myself that this time if something feels off, I'm allowed to say so out loud before the whole place floods again. One of the last little full-circle moments came on an ordinary weekday. The neighbor knocked on our door, needing help carrying in a bulky box. As we wrestled it up her steps, she laughed. "You know," she said, "you don't look over your shoulder like that anymore, do you?" I hadn't realized it until she said it. I walked back to my house, key warm in my hand, and for the first time it hit me. The danger I was always scanning for wasn't in the building anymore. It was just old muscle memory catching up to a safer life. What about you? Have you ever had to fight for your place in someone else's life, or felt like you were living someone else's drama? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts.